everyone, and welcome to our Unity for Humanity panel highlighting different global models for promoting inclusive job opportunities. My name is James Turnage-Lannan, and I'm a program manager here at Unity on the social impact team. I'll be moderating today's panel discussion between our three amazing panelists that we have here today. First up, we have Mona Mourshed, who is the CEO of Generation. Also with us is Hamza Rouissi, who is the VP of Marketing at Ripen. And lastly, we have Greg Horowitt, who is the Director of Innovation at University of California, San Diego. Thank you all for joining me today. I'm super excited to just dive into this conversation. So why don't we go ahead and do that? I'd love to learn more about each of you individually and all of the amazing work that you're doing. So with that said, Mona, I'd love to start with you. Why don't you go ahead and kick us off with an introduction to yourself and Generation?
Terrific. Thank you, James. So Generation is a global employment nonprofit. And so what we do is recruit, train, and place learners into careers that would otherwise have been beyond their reach. We began our operations in 2015, and we're now in 17 countries. We've served over 46,000 learners, and they have an 83% job placement rate within 3 months of program completion. They earn anywhere from 3 to 4 times in income what they would have otherwise had prior to the program. And at the 1-year mark, about 70% continue to be employed. And what we very much try to do is to begin by, for all of our programs, and we work across now 35 professions, spanning tech, healthcare, customer service, and skilled trades, is we begin by pre-confirming job vacancies with our employer partners. We want to know that before anyone comes into our program, that the job is there for them to go into. Then we recruit our learners, and we're obviously always looking for a profile that is different than what the employers traditionally hire. And then our learners go through a 4 to 12 week experience. So this is a boot camp that is profession specific. We interweave the technical skills, behavioral skills, and mindsets that our learners need to perform each activity in the role at a high level. In parallel, we have social support services like mentorship. And then once our graduates complete the program, they then interview with our employer partners. And then once they're on the job, we then track return on investment. And what that means for our learners is their personal and financial well-being. And what it means for our employer partners is the cost per hire, productivity outcomes, quality outcomes, speed to promotion. And then all of this obviously creates a lot of data that we continue to track in order to improve how our programming works. So that's very much the heart of what Generation does. And we just recently did a survey of our alumni from 2 to 5 years ago. And really excited to share that for 78% of our alumni, they are in a better financial position than where they were previously. And about 40% of them are also able to save on top of the 70% who can afford their daily needs. So these are the types of things that we look at over time to really understand whether we're making a difference.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing and giving us all those numbers. That's awesome to hear. Hamza, can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about Ripen?
Definitely. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel, James. I'm excited to be part of this conversation and hope that Ripen's experience will help inspire others to build more inclusive models. So a little bit about Ripen. We are North America's largest marketplace for experiential learning. And essentially what we do is to make it easy for higher ed institutions and industry partners to collaborate through short-term project engagements that are embedded directly into the curriculum. So effectively, our core business is to transform class assignments into something more relevant, more applied, if you will. And at the end of the day, where learners gain real-world experience and employers can hire for the right talent. So to give you an idea of the scale, to date, we have enabled close to 100,000 learners at more than 300 post-secondary institutions to partake in over 6 million hours of applied learning with about 17,000 employers. And really what got us into This model is we realized that students are often graduating without opportunities to gain real world experience. And that translates into slowdown into their career later on in life. So there are some stats that I wanted to share with you from Strata and Bernie & Glass report. There's about 40% of college graduates that are underemployed, and about 75% of them remain underemployed 10 years after they graduate. And at a high level, less than 10% of students in America get to do an internship due to qualifications barriers. So what we want to do at Ripen is to lower those barriers for students and as well as learners to gain workplace experience. So when all is said and done, our mission is to end graduate underemployment, one student experience at a time, and that mission is ever evolving.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Greg, I'd love to hear more about you and how and what the Columbia Digital Content Production is all about.
Absolutely. My background started as a serial entrepreneur, then a venture capitalist. And then after I semi-retired, began working with local entrepreneurs, coaching and mentoring them, taking over a local incubator in San Diego, and then growing that into a network in 25 countries. And that gave us kind of a very unique perspective from a practitioner standpoint of how entrepreneurship was supported and encouraged and grown, and began writing about it and lecturing about it. And that then gave me the opportunity to come back to San Diego at the University of California, San Diego, where the chancellor asked us to not only grow the level of startup creation, but I believed you needed to do it from the cultural ethos side of things that complemented then the technical skills creation. And so we now create programs that teach the behavioral fitness and cognitive agility that then go along with all the technical skills that allow people to lean into these future opportunities as opposed to merely analyze and practice them. The Columbia Digital Content Production Program, which we now call the Latin America Digital Content Production, was a realization from various places we've worked around the world and in partnership with companies like Visionary Realms, who's leading a lot of this effort, one of the leading game development companies in the region, that the future is in this digital content production. That people are consuming far more content than they ever have before. There's a demand for the skills necessary to create this content. It's moving away from a lot of the more traditional forms of production in film studios, and a lot of it is being done on computers. And so it's this interesting mashup of the creative sectors with the technical sectors. And so there was an opportunity for us to step in and help them and see if we could create actual workforce development programs that would allow them to not only learn these skills, but then practice these skills and then apply these skills, but not only do them in terms of case studies and the typical theoretical approaches that a lot of academia does, but in real life projects, working with the companies that are actually producing this stuff. So in the case of Visionary Realms, they will open up aspects of their worlds they're building for Pantheon: Rise of the Fallen. They will open up these worlds to the students in these projects. They will have them develop these artifacts and creative reproductions within the space. And as this dynamic game grows over the next decade, students can actually apply their skills directly to meaningful opportunities, but more importantly, to actually creating their own careers and jobs where they can get hired by these content producers.
Wow, I wish, you know, when I was in school, I had you know, access to something like this, because that would have been my dream to be able to, you know, come right out of school and work on a, you know, at a game studio, you know, working on a game. Because my background, I love video games. But thank you all for the introductions. And now, just purely out of my own curiosity, I'm really curious to hear about how you all got involved with your organizations or initiatives. So with that, Hamza, I'd love to hear about how you got started with Ripen, how you became the VP of marketing, and what drew you to Ripen.
That's a great question, James. So I come from a background of digital marketing, specifically for digital marketplaces. So among others, I worked at cars.com and a few others in the past. And, you know, I came across Ripen not too long ago. actually, I've been at Ripen for the past 6 months, but what resonated quite a lot with me is the fact that Ripen's purpose at the end of the day is to democratize access to any student, to any company, and the other way around. And that resonates with me because I'm originally from Morocco, and I have done my university studies in the States. And as an international student in an undergraduate or graduate program, your options for internships and just getting integrated into the workplace are rather limited. So knowing that you can bring the work experience into the classroom is something that has spoken quite a lot to me. And as a matter of fact, later on in my life, throughout my career, I've had quite a lot of engagement with students. We've had magnificent programs with Northwestern, McCormick School of Engineering. And, you know, at the end of the day, there were just too many signs pointing to Ripen being onto something. And super excited to be part of the Ripen family now.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Mona, I'd love to hear kind of just the origin story of Generation. How did that come about?
Absolutely. So I actually began my work in education at the K-12 level and spent a lot of time focused on how do we get our students literate and numerate and graduated, and particularly began this work in the Middle East. And then I realized that after they graduated, life was not as I thought it would be, right? You know, so essentially they were struggling to get employment. We're struggling also to get into university. And so that was the moment when I realized, okay, this is the problem, the education to employment space. This is where I need to be spending my time. You know, so I sort of went up the chain, if you will. And at the time, I was able to lead a research effort that looked at education to employment systems across countries, many countries in the world. And we ended up looking at over 150 youth employment programs across 25 countries. And what struck me was that there are, you know, obviously tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of youth employment programs in the world, right? But they typically span two types. So there are those that are training lots of learners, but they typically have a low job placement rate. And then there are those that train and place learners into a job, but they typically are low scale, you know, so hundreds per year, sometimes low thousands. And so for me, the question was, well, how can you marry these two? So how can you have a train and place program that can serve tens of thousands, ultimately hundreds of thousands per year, and is global and is cost effective? And that is what we are seeking to do with Generation.
Yeah, that's very, very admirable. And I completely agree where that should be the focus. So thank you for sharing. Greg, how did you begin working with Visionary Realms on the Latin America content production? And yeah, could you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, that goes back over 2 decades. The CEO of Visionary Realms and I have been friends for the past 2 decades. When he was in venture capital and investments, we often looked at opportunities together and collaborated on those. And so the power of social networks, you know, that you stay in touch, you work on collaborative things, and then when opportunities present themselves, you figure out the synergies there. And then a little over 6 years ago, when the leadership at UC San Diego approached me and said, you know, would you be willing to help us develop this series of these new programs? There seemed an intersection there, plus the fact that I had helped build the Colombian ecosystem through our work down there and throughout all of Latin America, through our work both previously with Global Connect and through my advisory firm, where we've helped develop these ecosystems. So everything just naturally came together.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So now I'd like to just take a moment and dive a bit deeper into the discussion around each of your initiatives. And I'd like to understand what exactly, you know, they're all about, and, you know, what are your current or future impacts for these initiatives. So Mona, I'd like to start with you with Generation. And, you know, just one thing that I really appreciate about Generation is the research that you guys do. And, you know, especially it shows how you support why it's so important to break down the barriers that are placed in front of underrepresented job seekers. So can you tell us a bit more about that research that you've done in this area and how it's helped inform the way that generation breaks down those barriers?
Absolutely. So with generation, we sit right in the middle of thousands of learners and thousands of employers across now 17 countries. And so what that enables us to do is to have a front row seat in terms of what are the barriers and challenges and biases that we see happening in both directions. And so we try to focus our research specifically on those points of friction. So I call this sort of practice-informed research. And so, for example, we just did a large research effort on mid-career workers, which we released in July of this year. And the reason why we focused on mid-career workers here is because when you look at the long-term unemployed, particularly in OECD countries, the vast majority, 40 to 70%, are mid-career. So they are age 45, 50 plus. And yet, when you look at programming, there's very little that is focused on this population. And so we did a large-scale survey effort across employers, across mid-career who are unemployed, mid-careers who successfully transition careers, and younger peers. And I'll just share one factoid and then link to how it's informed our work. So we found that when you ask employers what is their perception of candidates and across a spectrum of ages, so from 18 to 60, you find that globally, the preference is for those who are, age, like basically in their 30s. Those who are age 45 plus, only 15% are perceived to be a good fit for the role on the basis of the CV. Then when you ask those same employers, well, how are the age 45 plus people doing in the entry level and intermediate roles that you have today, that you've actually employed? And there, what you hear is that 87% are performing as well, if not better than their younger peers. That's what bias looks like. And so that said to us, okay, well, how are we going to break that down? And so we've been experimenting with age-blind CVs. We've been experimenting with see the portfolio first. So Hamza, a bit in terms of the experiential, but this is the portfolio of work that they've done before you even get to see the CV. And so these are the types of things that help us to understand how do we mitigate the hiring bias. And this is important for our mid-careers, and it's important for our youth from a different perspective. The youth are, employers view them as, well, you're immature, you don't have enough experience. Okay, so how do you break that? So that's why we do the research, so that it can support us to improve outcomes and also hopefully support policymakers to think differently about the types of interventions that they support.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So for my next question, and sticking with our theme for Unity for Humanity of imagining a better world, I noticed on your website in big bold letters, it said reimagining global employment. And I'm just curious, what does that mean to you? What does reimagining global employment mean to generation?
Yeah, so those are big words. And so I'll just take a piece of it, which is the world sees education and employment as sequential events. First you do education, then suddenly comes employment. And tragically, we know from all the mass unemployment that we see in the world that that transition is filled with friction. And it doesn't work out for particularly those who come from underrepresented communities. And so for us, it's about how do you just flip that sequence? So as I described, at Generation, we start with the job. We start with where is the job? And not just an esoteric job, but like actually this employer with this job vacancy, right? And then we are training and placing people into those roles. In my mind, much of what we see with technical vocational systems across the world, and frankly, technical vocational systems, this is where the vast majority of people and workforce dollars sit. So we need much more of a focus of how do we think job first and then training second, so that genuinely many more people are able to access opportunities, as opposed to you complete a program and it's 18 months later and you still don't have a job and you still don't have well-being. People are not willing to accept that kind of a deal any longer. And so the sequence must change. The bridge must become much stronger.
Perfectly put. And then the last question around kind of this deeper discussion I had for you was around the pilot program that Generation is doing in Pakistan in collaboration with Unity. So I just was curious, why did you choose Pakistan to pilot this program, and why did you feel that Unity was a good fit to be a partner for this?
So we are so excited about this. So as you know, we chose Pakistan because one, it's one of the world's leading destinations for offshore development. And two, when we looked at the gaming industry, and particularly those with gaming developer skills, it's very nascent. And so for us, it felt like this is a country where multiple of the intrinsics are there, but it hasn't been pulled together for this particular profession of being a gaming developer. And then Unity, obviously, for our graduates to be able to demonstrate mastery with Unity's tools, with just the ability to be able to use your creation tools successfully and to be able to say, we have experience with this, and to share their portfolio, it just opens a world of opportunity, both within gaming, but also, frankly, this is relevant for engineering, for manufacturing, for healthcare, for education. And so we're starting with a pilot cohort of 120 learners. And we are focusing particularly on females because we want to be able to create an opportunity for them that often is not available. And on the basis of that, we are already getting a tremendous amount of interest. I mean, James, you know that we just had our recruiting drive, and literally, like, our site crashed because of all of the interest from various learners or candidates. So we're thrilled to be getting underway. And in the spring, I think we'll have much more to say together about the impact of this program. But we're incredibly grateful, incredibly excited.
Absolutely. And I'm the same way. And I'm just, thankful to actually be a part of that experience as well, and helping drive that. So thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for answering those questions. Greg, I'd love to dive a bit deeper in the Latin America content production. Could you tell us about just how, tell us about Visionary Realms initiative and participation in this, and if there's any other partners that are also supporting it?
Yeah, I mean, it takes an entire village to kind of do these programs, including we're already at UC San Diego, we're already talking to Ripen about how you kind of can measure not only the acquisition of skills, but the application of skills on these projects. And so being able to bring a platform like that to this weaves together all these things. And as I said, it really came from this concept in Colombia in particular. The president of the country right now ran on this platform of what he called the orange economy, this creative economy, and that it can be used not only for entertainment and entertainment consumption, but this whole industry is moving towards having very ripe applications in enterprise solutions, actually solving real industry and social problems beyond just the mere entertainment stuff. And so teaching these skills bleeds into all these other aspects of society beyond just merely, movies and games and all the traditional stuff we look at. And Visionary Realms really kind of saw that, but it really started just with the conversation about that all economies are looking to create prosperity. Prosperity often comes from people, not only from the job creation, but more importantly, from the impact that job creation results in. And when you realize that there is this demand side of things where people are looking for this kind of content and for these skills, you see an opportunity to step in and help create those skills. And then going one step further beyond that is when you have this kind of practicums, these project-based learning opportunities, to be able to go beyond the traditional degree type of acknowledgements and give people certificates, badges, and that the future is going to be in this micro skilling with society, and that people will no longer have just this 4-year relationship with an academic or knowledge institution, but it'll be a lifelong type of learning. And so people can not only do the traditional skilling, but upskilling and reskilling is going to be a real important part of all of these things, and the ability to create these project-based learning things where people can learn new skills, but also have access to all these new tools, methodologies, frameworks that end up evolving into these kind of new habits and rituals, routines, and even standards for industries, and then bleed across these traditional sectors is going to be kind of what's really important. And so our partners include everyone from, governments, and underneath that, it's usually the ministries of economic development, and in some cases, they've created the ministries of creative services. But it's also all successful sustainable partnerships also have to have a large private sector engagement. And that involves the private companies, both in the region and around the world, that can partner on these opportunities. And the third is these relationships with academia and research institutions, so that we're always advancing the thresholds of this knowledge and what it can do, but also making sure that we have a place for these knowledge workers to gain the skills and then apply them in the workplace. So we're working with a number of universities and other institutions, both locally in the region. So in the case of Colombia, I did a 2-hour conversation this morning with some of the universities and with some of the local platforms within it that are responsible for the development of the innovation ecosystem there. We've talked to funders, which include groups like USAID and Inter-American Development Bank and the Multilateral Investment Fund that provide the kind of, but also there's quite a bit of interest from the private sector, whether it's in these foundations that want to support job creation, or even investors who actually see that there's opportunities for them to do a traditional kind of venture philanthropy model in the region. So we're kind of touching on all of those.
Amazing. It's amazing to have all these different facets, all these different partners, get involved and help, help do something, for the social good. So thank you for that. And I just learned on this panel that you switched the name from Colombia to Latin America. So I'm curious, are you still targeting Colombia as the first initial area in which you'll provide this initiative?
We will, but just in coincidence, I was also pulled into a complete parallel conversation around the same time with Mexico, where the government there was interested in digital content production, because UC San Diego sits near the Cali-Baja border. There was a large studio in northern Baja that James Cameron and 20th Century Fox had built for the filming of Titanic, that has now become a major production studio for movies ranging from Planet of the Apes and X-Men, beyond that. But they're interested as well in these new kinds of job creation, economic opportunities. So we're now trying to put some of these conversations together and see how they can be synergistic and amplify one another in what they do.
Gotcha. And so what drew your focus towards Latin America specifically instead of other regions? Just out of curiosity.
So a couple things. One is existing relationships that we've done. Two is, as I mentioned in Colombia, the president of the country actually ran for his presidency on this concept of the orange economy, on the strength that the workforce development could be focused on these creative economies, not only to help in movies and gaming, but actually that these creative athletes could also be applied to solving large industrial and social issues as well. So you have to have willing partners on all sides. And it's wonderful when the person at the top is the one creating the message that then creates almost this pull into the market, as opposed to you having then to convince a region or a country that what you're trying to do is relevant and applied. The other thing that's important is that with so many activities you do to kind of shepherd the emergence of innovation ecosystems, it's very tough to draw correlations between an action you have early on and an outcome that happens down the way, because it's lots of little things that come together to create a series of impacts on the back end. These kinds of opportunities have very linear outcomes. You help skill people, they get a job, they produce, impact and wealth in the region. We're even looking at very interesting models that have been explored in the United States of creating things like institutional service agreements, where you actually lend people the money to take these vocational programs, almost like scholarships. But when they then get the jobs, they take a small portion of what they earn and pay back these scholarships so that they're then made available for a future generation of knowledge workers. And so it's also teaching these cultural concepts of paying it forward and supporting an entire ecosystem. So it has more to do with than just creating the job, and how do you create an entire community.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like I've never even thought of that concept, but I think that's super important to be able to pay it forward once you've gotten yourself in a position, having a great, well-paying job. I think that's a great lesson for folks to learn as well. And kind of just the last question I have for you around this is around the development of this initiative. And I understand you're still kind of in the early stages, but I'm just curious where at in the development process are you, and if you have a specific time frame on when you're looking to launch.
Looking to launch in the next 6 months. Mexico's already done some more of the educational programs, but because when you do these kind of large system level opportunities, you have to do a lot of socialization. It's the equivalent of all the dogs sniffing one another. You've got to do it early and often, because people want to feel like, particularly in your title for this session, it's inclusive economic opportunities. So that also means that it's not only inclusivity for the people who are directly taking the programs, but inclusivity for all the people who then participate. So government leaders who then understand what role their policy making affects what we're doing. Funders who then understand how their funding unlocks the potential of these opportunities. The market, so that they understand from a consumer standpoint how this is changing the very nature of their industries from product development. And so you have to do a lot of the socialization, which we're in the process of doing. And it's like moving a lot of pieces, but in almost like a synchronized effort. And eventually they kind of approach the target. So we're about 6 months away from having the program in Colombia, in air quotes, launched, because that will mean, but the educational elements of this program are already being done. It's already being taught, and people are already graduating and applying those skills.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Hamza, I'd love to learn more about Ripen. So could you tell us a bit about Ripen's mission and how the Ripen platform and the work that you do helps to achieve that mission?
Certainly. So our mission is to essentially end graduate underemployment as we know it. The underlying linchpin here is that when, and by the way, Ripen was started by our co-founders when they were in university going through their co-op program and realizing that specifically here in Canada, if you're in a business program, it is mandatory for you to do the co-op program and or internship. It is not necessarily the same for all the other programs. So, and they felt they've gained so much more experience and valuable skills out of that co-op that they were a bit taken back that it's not every student that gets the opportunity to do that. So when we talk about underemployment, the underlying motive behind is to connect students through a classroom setting to real life projects and work that is essentially put on the platform, our platform, by mostly small and medium businesses and nonprofits. And the idea is that not only these students will gain additional skills through that applied expertise, if you will, but also it will help them better narrow down what their career aspirations are and which field they want to pursue. In addition to, quite frankly, leveling the playing field, because if you come from an elite school, typically you have an elite job lined up before you even graduate, but for the vast majority of students, that's not the realistic case. And in this instance, by using experiential learning, they get to network a bit more, they get to know a little bit more about what's ahead for them in their career. So that was really the motivation behind Ripen, and we see it resonate quite a lot also with students from a minority perspective, and also here in Canada again. If you live in a remote area of Canada, you don't get as much access to big and impactful internships because typically they're located in a big metro area. So on top of your internship, you have to factor in for the cost of going and living in Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal or what have you.
Awesome. I know, having spoken with your team a couple of times, I had heard about you guys had recently launched the Level Up program, which is designed to help students, ease the students' transition from school to actual employment. Can you talk a bit more about this program, some of the outcomes of it that you're seeing from not only students, but also the employers that are participating?
Yeah, absolutely. So for a little bit of context, when COVID hit, we, like many other companies, obviously had to think of new ways to live up to our mission. And especially knowing that one of our key stakeholders, students in this case, were in a bind because COVID meant that many in-person internships and co-ops were being canceled. And we were looking at a whole generation of students at risk of derailing their future careers before they even got started. So we worked hand in hand with the government of Canada to create a new program, giving learners direct access to short-term and remote internships that not only help the learners, but also stimulate the economic activity for small and medium businesses and nonprofits. So the way Level Up works is very simple. On one side of our platform, you have small and medium businesses that list a project that could benefit the company and for which they need help. And this is typically, the help that we're talking about is typically about an 80-hour work engagement for one or many students at a time, and is completely free to the company. Learners on the other side of the platform, from all across of Canada, will get to browse those projects and then get matched with the right opportunity based on their skills and based on their educational level up to that point, if you will. So, and all of this is handled by the Ripen platform. So the company and the learner then agree on the scope of the project, and after the work is done, learners are paid via Ripen a stipend of about $1,400 for their work, and that's completely funded by the government of Canada. And again, it's at zero cost for the SMB, which is also a great way of stimulating the local economy. So to cover a little bit of the results that we're seeing so far, Canada is actually one of the most diverse countries in the world. And with that in mind, when we worked hand in hand with the government, diversity, equity, and inclusion were big goals for this initiative. So specifically, we were to achieve at least a threshold of 30% representation for minority and underrepresented groups within the learners that benefit from the program. And I think you can see here some of the numbers that we're seeing as of today. So for example, 35% of all women learners that have participated in Level Up have done so in an underrepresented field, for example, STEM. So for context, in Canada, only about 23% of women would typically work in this field. So comparing the results of Level Up to the general population, it's at least a 1.5 factor of efficacy there. The other thing that we saw and are very proud of is students that come from a visible minority represent about 45% of the beneficiaries of this program, versus if you were to benchmark it to the general population, it's about 22%. So it's almost a factor of 2, if not a little bit more. And that is thanks to the focused effort that Ripen and our partners, both from educational and industry side, have put behind. So to illustrate, for example, we have been working with Contact North in BC, which is mostly for remote learners in Northwestern communities. Most are indigenous, to match them with work integrated opportunities. We also work quite a lot with newcomers to Canada, including permanent residents and refugees. So we seek to essentially, as I mentioned before, leveling the playing field and giving equal opportunity to all. So the bottom line on that is when we are currently pacing at about 70% of learners participating in this program, meeting that inclusivity threshold, which is fantastic news, not only for us, obviously, and the learners and the companies, but also for the government of Canada, specifically our partner, which is Employment and Social Development Canada. And then from an industry perspective, we have seen that the Level Up program brings incredible value to small and medium businesses as well as nonprofits. So for example, out of the $12 million committed by the government to this initiative, more than 8 million have been injected so far into local communities and benefiting for the vast majority small businesses and nonprofits. All of this at zero cost to them. And specifically keeping in mind the context of COVID, and it was definitely a great help at a time of need. So to illustrate, for example, at a category level, marketing projects, which are one of the most popular categories on our platform, have collectively delivered at about 100,000 hours of work experience. And we have essentially paid out, give or take, 1.7 million to learners, but the companies on the back end have received about 3.4 million of labor value that is compared if they were to go through consultants or other stakeholders. And then, quite frankly, I could spend a lot of time talking about numbers and the data geek a little bit, but I think it's best if you hear it directly from some of our participants and how this program has been meaningful to them.
It was an opportunity to take initiative, and it was an opportunity to have hands-on learning instead of just being told this is how you do it. It's, you know, having some freedom to actually do it and let my own creativity flow. And so that was really helpful.
I learned that I really enjoyed marketing, even though I'm in accounting. This is my second marketing project. After getting the hands-on experience, I think I might consider studying it in my university or going forward as well.
I definitely would recommend this way of learning to other students because theory is not enough in real life practical experience, because we would need some actual work experience, and Ripen is a great way to bridge the two gaps together.
Hi, my name is Zoe, and I'm the Film Festival Director at Real Youth, and we were lucky enough to have 5 Level Up interns through this past cycle, and they were incredible. It was an enormous help for a small organization that's doing our best to do big work in the country. So,
I'm David Sim, president of Arbordale. The Level Up program could be very beneficial and very important to us because of the shortage of and the lack of youth in the agri-science and agri-food business where we operate. It gives us, again, the chance to perhaps interest them in moving into a sector that could desperately use the help and the interest of Canada's youth.
I am representing Community Futures Fraser Fort George, which is an amazing nonprofit organization here in northern BC. The ability for businesses and nonprofits to be able to collaborate with our post-secondary institutions is challenging when you're not in a big metropolitan where there's lots of money making happening. So through Level Up, it's giving our community access to partnership with our post-secondary institutions, the College of New Caledonia and the University of Northern BC, so that our businesses and nonprofits are gaining more access to powerful knowledge and knowledge making.
These are just some of the real life stories of participants, both on the academy side and industry side. And I think one of the panelists mentioned earlier that sometimes you get surprised by the receptiveness of the marketplace, the programs that you put out there. This is definitely one of those. It felt like there was a lot of pent up demand for something like that. And as soon as we launched Level Up, we had thousands and thousands of students and companies applying directly, and it's been a great success so far, and it's been a pleasure to make an impact at a time of need.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing that you've had so much impact already, considering that it's only launched earlier this year. So congratulations to that.
Thank you.
One last question I have for you around this is around Ripen's focus around students and university. I know that the platform itself, and especially when you guys launched, there's a heavy focus towards students and universities, but are there also opportunities for learners that aren't students to participate in the platform? And if so, I'd love to hear more about that.
That's a wonderful question. It's actually part of our evolving mission at Ripen. So we have recently changed our mission from eliminate graduate underemployment to just eliminate underemployment. And the reason behind that is we realized that to solve the mission of graduate underemployment, we needed to solve underemployment at large so graduates can continue their careers employed meaningfully. And what we mean by that is you can no longer graduate and just get a job, and that's a job for life. The future of work means new skills every 5 years or 5 years from now that don't exist yet today. And I think my co-panelists have made a great case for that today, is that it's an ever evolving landscape, and we need to equip students of today and tomorrow to get the skills to accompany them throughout their careers. So in that model, students need to become lifelong learners and reskill or upskill to keep up with the jobs of tomorrow. So for example, Ripen has worked with various government agencies and foundations to essentially deploy our platform where needed. For example, we have worked with EdgeUp through the Economic Development Calgary, which is essentially reskilling displaced oil and gas workers in Alberta for careers in IT. We have done some work through reskilling retail workers and Future Skills Center through the Government of Canada. And it's an ever evolving landscape out there. We hear from a lot of partners about how Ripen can help them in their specific area, and this is absolutely a conversation that we keep having at Ripen every day, and that keeps getting us excited every day.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, if I had this platform when I was in school and was exiting school, it would have helped me tremendously to land my first job. It was a little disheartening to get so many rejections out of school, but I guess it also helped you know, in the long run. And I ended up getting, you know, landing on my feet somewhere pretty nicely, I think. So believe it or not, we are approaching the end of this panel. But before we go ahead and wrap up, I did want to shift the conversation just to the future a bit. So thinking long term, how do each of you see your organizations and initiatives evolving in the future? And what impact do you hope to leave? So with that, I'd love to start with Greg.
So where these programs are going is where they're going to begin. We're going to begin breaking down the traditional silos between industries and what, as I said, becomes entertainment and what becomes business oriented. That's part of the future. Also, two other words in the title of this thing, we talked about inclusivity, but two other titles we'd love to see included in these kinds of programs. One is equity and one is diversity. And diversity doesn't just have to be, you know, ethnic diversity, but it's also just people bringing people from very diverse backgrounds and experiences and kind of blending them together. And of course, equity is the fact that, you know, we can help create all this talent with these platforms, but ultimately opportunity is not distributed equally. So how we give people access to this inclusive opportunity will create greater equity around it. So that's where we would love to see it. And we'd love to see more of these kinds of partnerships where, you know, companies like ours are working with Mona and working with Hamza more, and that these kind of synergies and that these kinds of opportunities you're presenting today introduce us to all these new opportunities. And so 10 years from now, when we have this conversation, we'll talk about something entirely different and new.
Absolutely. Mona, where do you see generation, being in 5 to 10 or 20 years, and the impact that it's left or is going to leave?
We change so much year to year, particularly in the times we're in at the moment. So first of all, James, I have to say, I mean, just when I look at my co-panelists, like there's so much complementarity across us that I feel like that the three of us need to go off and have a conversation about what we could do together. So that should probably be part of our near future. But more broadly, as I was saying, from my perspective, you could have 20 generations and we're not going to make enough of a dent in the world's unemployed, right? Let alone the underemployed. And so we have as a really important goal for ourselves to embed our 7-step methodology inside public workforce systems. So inside the technical vocational systems. And today we work across our countries, in about 12 of them, we have some level of partnership with the government. And so increasingly, it's about how we can work with our government partners to gather data on things that they weren't gathering data on before, or putting in place certain policies that today are absolute roadblocks for the equity and inclusiveness, which we've all been talking about here, or training them to deliver our programming or whatever it might be. But unless we're able to shape the system, as Greg was commenting on earlier, then you can't get to this massive level of scale that that we all aspire to. And so that's very much on our agenda.
Thank you. And Hamza, what about for Ripen?
So our BHAG, or Big Hairy Audacious goal, is to enable 1 million learner experiences by 2025. It's an ambitious goal, but I can guarantee you that everyone at Ripen is extremely motivated by that. We are actively working on expanding to more learners and more academic institutions. Also reaching other underserved learner populations, for example, in liberal arts. And obviously, keep nurturing and building more partnerships with our academic and business partners to help learners. And critically important too is government relations, and get government programs to see the benefit of essentially accelerating this type of initiatives, because as you have seen through Level Up, it does make a difference in real people's lives, and it does go a long way.
Absolutely. And lastly, before we go, how can aspiring job seekers or even supporters get involved with each of your initiatives? So Hamza, I'll stick with you. How can folks get involved with Ripen?
Certainly. So students can always check if their courses are or offer experiential learning through Ripen. If not, they can visit our website, for example, to figure that out. And we are more than happy to initiate conversations with them and their educators on how to best leverage our platform. On the back end of it, employers are always welcome to participate on Ripen. It is free to small and medium sized businesses, so please do take advantage of that. Obviously, we are built on partnerships. We are an open marketplace, and we do hope to any partner from a grant perspective or government perspective. We love to have those conversations and match the leverage the efficiency of our marketplace to help them deliver their results.
Greg, I know the Latin America content production isn't ready for job seekers just yet, at least from my understanding. You can tell me if I'm wrong on that, but how can others, if folks want to support, how can they reach out and support?
First way is get connected. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. Tell me that you listen to this conversation and that you would like to stay tuned. We will then kind of, as things come evolve, we'll begin sharing that evolution with you. And when it's the right time to engage, we'll hopefully create an opportunity for you to do so.
And lastly, Mona, how can folks get involved with Generation?
Just go to our website, generation.org. There is a country drop-down menu. Go to your country if you're in one of the 17 where we're present, and you'll see all the programs which we have on offer. And if you're an employer, there's also a site on our page for that, and you can sign up, and one of us in one of our countries will be in touch with you.
Perfect. Well, we did it. We're at the end of the panel. Mona, Hamza, and Greg, thank you so much for joining me today and discussing each of your initiatives. For attendees at home watching, if you want more information about Generation Ripen or the Latin America content production, or want to get involved with supporting them, definitely make sure to check out the locations that each of the 3 speakers has just mentioned. We'll also make sure to have links posted for you to check out. With that said, thank you all for watching and enjoy the rest of the Unity for Humanity Summit.